Hi, I'm Daniel Levine, and welcome to MitoCast. Mitochondria have been implicated in a wide range of diseases across the lifespan from birth to old age, but despite their essential role in health and disease, there's little effort to organize research into mitochondria and recognize it as a unique field of medicine. We spoke to Navdeep Chandel, professor of medicine and biochemistry and molecular genetics at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine and a member of the MitoWorld Scientific Advisory Board, about the state of mitochondrial research, the need to organize the research enterprise to address fundamental questions, and why doing so could help drive collaborations and funding necessary to advance the field. Nav, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Danny.
We're going to talk about the field of mitochondrial biology, its potential to reshape our approach to health and disease, and your work with MitoWorld. Let's start with where we are in regard to our understanding of mitochondria. This is an area of biology that's been evolving. How well understood is the relationship between mitochondria and health and disease?
Um, I think most people who know very little about mitochondria are comfortable in thinking that mitochondria are key to health, and if they go wrong, maybe they're linked to diseases, many of the common diseases. And the reason is because mitochondria provide the energy, which is an ATP, right? And hence they were coined, I think, in the 50s as the powerhouse of the cell. So naturally, people think, wow, I need to have my mitochondria making optimal amounts of ATP for life, but to run, to do all the things that I enjoy doing, right? And maybe if some tissue where those mitochondria are not making enough ATP, that tissue starts to degenerate. And maybe that's why I get Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or diabetes, and the list goes on and on and on. And people for a long time just kept on invoking what's called the bioenergetic paradigm, that mitochondria make ATP for health, and when that doesn't work, you get pathology. Very simple idea. And then the other idea was, well, sometimes when mitochondria are dysfunctional, well, it's not only about ATP, but they make too much oxidative stress, and therefore you should take lots of antioxidants. And the reality is it's been difficult to test the ATP hypothesis in the sense that how do you give it back? How do you make it generate more ATP? It's not that simple. And then the other one is we've tried a lot of clinical trials with antioxidants and they've largely failed. So there's something more going on just about the biology of mitochondria and oxidative stress and bioenergetics. And what has changed now in the last 25 years, and my work has contributed to this along with many others, is the recognition that mitochondria not only release ATP to maintain health, and if they don't do that, then you get some pathology, but perhaps mitochondria release a whole bunch of other, let's just call signals that say to the cell, we're good to go. And it turns out one of the first signals that was discovered is the fact that mitochondria actually make oxidants. The things that antioxidants get rid of, they actually make oxidants to keep health, to keep a cell functioning properly. And if you get rid of those, if anything, those cells don't do so well. And there's many others, and we can talk about some of the other signals and how that's related. And now, one main thing that has always been seen in autopsies of a particular pathology is that the mitochondria don't look so right. Their shape doesn't look right, and they look dysfunctional. And so people say, aha, as we age or if we get a particular disease, our mitochondria have degenerated, and maybe that's the cause. But that's really a correlation, right? And the big question has always been with the common diseases, is it correlation or is it causal? And that's still an open question and depends on the disease. Some links are better than others. And if it's causal, is it just ATP or oxidative stress, or many of the other things you and I are going to talk about that might be perturbed? Right? And if we know all the other signals the mitochondria are releasing to maintain health, and if we can figure out how they're dysregulated in any particular pathology, then can we develop therapies with that knowledge to ameliorate the pathology or to just improve health span, right? And then the third point I want to make about diseases is there is a field called primary mitochondrial disease, where unfortunately kids are born with a particular mutation that impairs mitochondrial protein function. And they really do have mitochondrial dysfunction, but it's all over the place, the pathologies. And the question is, again, I think most of them would agree it's not all about ATP, why those kids are getting, yeah, particular, because if it was, then if you have one mutation in mitochondrial protein compared to the other in any given tissue, they should look the same if it's just about energy, because they both decrease the energy, but they do different things to these signals, perhaps. And again, that's also a very important field that can give us some insights with the unfortunate human experiments of not experiments, but human mutations that have gone wrong, to give us some insight into how mitochondria are functioning in health and disease.
You are one of the leading researchers in the field today. What attracted you to study mitochondria? How did you become involved in it?
Right. So I was a mathematician originally, and I was looking for a summer job. And I was lucky, a friend of mine was working in a surgery lab. And what the surgeons were interested in, they still are, and I'm finally coming back to this project after almost 30 years, or maybe 35 years, which is what you do is when you do transplant surgery, you take it from a donor, you put it in a recipient, and but there's a time. And that it's on ice, it's on, or it's cooled down a little bit. It has to just sit for simplicity, just on the tabletop with some solutions. And of course, and then you have to put it back. And this is a process where the tissues have to be preserved. So I got interested in how to preserve tissues or an organ, and that would be beneficial for transplants. It's a big need, and I liked it because here it is. If you could figure that problem out, you're making a huge difference, possibly, right? And that was very appealing. And a lot of that biology has to do with oxygen. You go from low oxygen to high oxygen states, and all the oxygen largely is being used by mitochondria. So I did my PhD on how mitochondria use oxygen and at different low and high levels, and that led to what else mitochondria are doing beyond energy, because oxygen is related, consumption by mitochondria is related to ATP generation, but we started to show that the way oxygen is is being sensed by mitochondria can actually change your genes, and that's in the nucleus, right? And so that got this idea of mitochondria beyond ATP as signaling organelles, and that's what I've made my living doing. But the big thing is for me and the rest of the field, to figure out how they're communicating essentially with the rest of the cell, and how that maintains the health of any given cell, how it's, when it's dysregulated, what pathologies happen, whether the common pathologies are because these signals are not working properly, and whether we can therapeutically target them for health and disease.
And is that mitochondria signaling the focus of your work today?
Yeah, it's almost exclusively trying to find out what are the signals for health beyond ATP. So they're releasing other things, and when those signals are not working properly in any given tissue, is that sufficient to cause a particular pathology? And does that pathology then look like ALS or Parkinson's or muscle degeneration or just a normal aging process? And then try to figure out ways to fix that.
Mitochondria have been implicated in a wide range of diseases across the lifespan, from birth to old age. They're not only metabolic conditions that are rare, but also chronic diseases and diseases of aging in which mitochondria play a role. And that includes cancer and diabetes and neurodegenerative diseases that you alluded to. What do you see as the potential for the study of mitochondria to enable new approaches to tackle these conditions?
Right. So as I was saying, that if you take any particular pathology, it's a neurodegenerative pathology, and you try to ALS, which is a motor neuron disease, a devastating disease, is the first question is, they have some ideas about what might be causing ALS, like this protein TDP43, for example, is linked, or in Alzheimer's, some people think amyloids or tau proteins are linked. And the question is whether, when those proteins are not functioning properly, do they eventually cause the mitochondria not to function properly, which is then causal for the disease. But the key question is, if they're causing mitochondrial dysfunction, what does that really mean? Is it just all about ATP, or are they making too much oxidative stress, or not, for example, making a particular metabolite from mitochondria that controls the epigenetic landscape, right? Which controls how the genes are being turned on or off. As you know, one of the popular themes in the aging world is these epigenetic clocks that people do. They're measuring DNA methylation. And I always remind people the enzymes that regulate DNA methylation, the substrates of those enzymes and the regulators, the metabolites of those enzymes come from the mitochondria, right? So you can imagine if the mitochondria aren't working, they're going to impact DNA methylation, and maybe that reads out in an aging-like phenotype, right? This is a hypothesis again. Everything I'm going to tell you, there's some evidence for this, but it's not settled law. Okay, that's the most important thing that people should recognize.
As you think across all these issues, are there major questions we need to address with regards to the role mitochondria play in health and disease?
Absolutely. So the first one is I can layer it down in three big fields. So the first one is just in health. What does a mitochondria do in any given cell? Why do we have a mitochondria? Why does a heart have a mitochondria? Why does a dopaminergic neuron or a motor neuron or a T cell have a mitochondria? Right? What are they exactly doing beyond ATP? And we and others are finding that mitochondria not only are releasing signals to maintain the optimal function of all these cells, but also how they're interacting with other organelles. These mitochondria, they're touching the other organelles like the lysosome and endoplasmic reticulum. Sometimes they're right around the nucleus. What is that all about? And if those things are not in the right location, then maybe that's not optimal functioning. And even the shape of mitochondria, under certain conditions, you want them to be fragmented. The other times, they're all hugging and kissing each other into a one long big mitochondria. And depending on the needs of the cell, that dynamic state can be very instructive for optimal function. So just figuring all of those nitty gritty details is really important. And then the other one is to figure out if any one of those are causal for any common diseases. Is it just a correlation? Correlation versus causality for common diseases. And the third one is a place where they're definitely causal. All these interactions not working properly or the signaling not working properly is primary mitochondrial disease. And to use those diseases to figure out what really went wrong. And then develop a variety of approaches from small molecules to gene therapy, et cetera, in the primary mitochondrial disease. But if it's causal in, say, Parkinson's or ALS or muscle degeneration, then try to fix that. And then the last one that I'm really excited about is just if you know what mitochondria in any given tissue are normally doing to maintain optimal health, can we somehow, as we age, keep it up, right? In a simplistic term, keep it optimal.
My sense is scientists come to study mitochondria through the study of a specific disease or various biological systems. What's the case for mitochondria as a unique field of biology and medicine, the way we've seen genetics emerge?
Right. So I think, if you're in the primary mitochondria field, primary mitochondrial disease field, right, there you do have the advantage. You can just start by knowing that the lesion and the pathogenic problem started in the mitochondria. And you can start to model that in many different ways. And in some ways, it's a daunting problem, but at the same time, at least you have a starting point. Where it's much tougher is those of us who are just interested in what mitochondria do in a normal cell, right? Using simple systems, simple reductionist systems, and perhaps the diseases are not in our radar. So these people may be in one place on the spectrum of what they're doing in one corner, and you have another bunch of people who don't care about mitochondria. But then they find out that some mutations, like in Parkinson's, are mutations in like PINK and Parkin, which are two genes that are implicated in Parkinson's, and they just happen to control mitochondrial health. And so then those people say, well, gee, I got to learn about mitochondria now, right? And but what you want is those sort of people to start communicating, and they are mechanisms to communicate. But you really need the basic biologists to continue to work on what mitochondria are doing normally, and how that's being leveraged for health. But then have other people who may not know even anything about mitochondria, but they have deep insight into diseases, and they're trying to interact. And to be honest with you, in some of the diseases that I've gotten interested in, that's what I'm doing. I'm going back to some studies on transplant again, because there's a wonderful lung transplant surgeon who's really fascinated by this, and he's going to lead it. But he's got me thinking again about it. And I have a great colleague who all he knows is tons of things about ALS. I have a terrific colleague on Parkinson's, but they're not mitochondrial aficionados. And I'm not an ALS or Parkinson's an aficionado, but we're having fun trying to think about whether I can contribute in any way. But that's just one vignette. But there are other people who are trying to do the same thing in their own little, ecosystems. But is this a coordinated thing happening? No. Right? This is all organically happening. People coming together, their institutes are at meetings. But is there like a real organic? Like, and there are foundations that will, like the Parkinson's foundations, the Michael J. Fox and others. They do a good job of trying to bring that. But I'll be honest with you. I sort of trying to do ALS. ALS, I don't think has been as transformative in that, or Alzheimer's yet, although the NIH just had an interesting new funding mechanisms to fund mitochondria and Alzheimer's finally. But you need like almost like an umbrella group to come and list the big questions and then find sources and have these people interact in a network manner so they can learn from each other. Because I think there are going to be things in Alzheimer's that may be applicable back to Parkinson's or things that we learn in the muscle or the heart. You know what I mean? There's going to be this crosstalk because they all have mitochondria.
Well, there are scientists like yourself who devote their research to mitochondria. What are the consequences of the lack of a well-defined and recognized field of study? What effect does this have on things like funding and collaboration that can be critical to accelerating advances?
Well, let's just take the aging field. I think that's a simple place because everybody can understand it. There isn't a day, and Danny, you know this better than I do. There isn't a day. There's another article saying we've cured aging, and take supplement X or supplement Y, and you'd be surprised how many of them invoke mitochondria. Right? All roads kind of lead to mitochondria as one of the big roads. And I look at all that data, and it's just at best correlative. It's not mechanistic. There's no specificity to it. But yet everybody's jumps on that bandwagon all the time. And I would encourage people who want to fund aging research to just step back, and let's go back to first principles and ask, what is mitochondria doing in a normal cell, and what happens when that cell ages, is to maintain or not maintain the optimal function. And let's really do this mechanistic sort of work. But there's many agencies that do fund and aging research, and sometimes mitochondria people get pieces of the pie of that, but it's not in a coordinated way.
Has the field been evolving in an organized way, or are there things that have been holding it back?
It's hard to know. Yeah, we haven't done the experiment whether something is being held back. What I would say is it's all organic, right? In other words, I have so many terrific colleagues who find the mitochondria and the ER are interacting maybe in Parkinson's or in Alzheimer's or something, and they try to hook up organically with experts in that field. Or the muscle people notice that muscle, and we're all getting older, we realize our muscles are not as optimal. So muscle physiologists and mitochondrial biologists get together to start studying that. But that's all organic, a lot of it. And sometimes there are initiatives, and like I said, there's just a initiative I just saw where the NIH wants to fund mitochondria research specifically for Alzheimer's, and they called it mitochondria nuclear signaling in Alzheimer's. And so that's good. But I don't think there's enough of those concerted ones. And it'd be nicer to even have all of those under maybe some umbrella where all of those people can then interact in a network and teach people not only in Alzheimer's, but those same people are in a network where they can interact with people who want to do Parkinson's or sarcopenia, muscle diseases, or heart failure, a failing heart, and some of it might be all just correlative at the end, and that's fine. But some of it might be causal.
We've seen a a genomics revolution from the mapping of the human genome. There's a field of genomic medicine today that's followed with gene therapies and gene editors and RNA therapies. Do you think there's a potential to raise mitochondrial medicine in the same way?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So some of that is done by the NIH's Common Fund. So, the way the NIH is designed, exactly what you were alluding to earlier, by diseases. We call it the National Cancer Institute, the National Blood and Heart Lung Institute, the National Institute of Aging, right? There's a National General Medicine one, which is a little bit more general. But sometimes what the NIH does do is they, through congressional direction and everything, they can make a common fund where they say we're going to fund an area. Sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's a new way to fund new and exciting areas. And I think there's many ways to do this. One could be through Congress and NIH, where you have a common fund for mitochondrial medicine, where you have people who are doing basic work hooked up to model organisms, including mice and worms and yeast, et cetera, to doing stuff in humans, where you're trying to at least correlatively see what's going on initially, and then if you have some insight to do clinical trials, et cetera, the whole gamut. But you can have, there's Chan Zuckerberg, there's the Howard Hughes, there's Altos that comes out of the Amazon Jeff Bezos ecosystem. There's all these different arenas, and but there's not one thing called the mito world, right? Where
Oh, there is a mito world.
there is a mito world, but it's not being funded at that scale. We were alluding to this thing that I've and many of us have gotten involved with. Really heroic work of Gordon Freeman to come together in an organic way to think about, is there a way to make a mito world with resources eventually to ask these questions. But I think the first thing you would do, okay, so let's do the thought experiment. Okay, now we're going to give you lots of money, you and some leaders, and come together in this mito world. What's the next step with it? Well, the first step is to bring the best people, including the newer, younger scientists, in a room and have sort of task forces. What's the link of mitochondria neurodegeneration? And what are the key questions? Mitochondria and aging. And at a basic level, I've been talking about mitochondria beyond ATP. You have all these signals that come out of mitochondria, right? Mitochondrial DNA, which encodes for mitochondrial proteins, if it's released into the cytoplasm, it can activate inflammation. Well, how does that work? Exactly all the steps. And is it dysregulated in autoimmunity? It's one of the big ideas, right? So let's have small little task force conferences, write those big questions, put it in our website, be transparent about it. And then perhaps if there's money already there, to start to focus on which ones are the key ones to begin with and sort of prioritize, and then go from there. And, again, some of these might already be funded, and they are, to be fair, but many of this isn't. But the one advantage that would be is there would be a network, right, of people that are connected through websites, through portals, through Zoom meetings, and other good foundations. I mean, the one that I participate in is Michael J. Fox Foundation. They do that. There are people who get funded by them are in a network. And there's other ones that do it as well. I think many of the foundations do it. So this is not a new idea, but at least you'd have all these mitochondria people who've been funded or are interested that can sort of join in through Zoom and yearly meetings, et cetera, to broadly cover mitochondrial. What's so exciting about it? I think the other thing is sometimes it's very restricted to a particular disease, as you said, including even the primary mitochondrial disease. There's great foundations around it, but people are interested in, of course, go and do it. But many of us, including myself, who don't work in that arena, don't typically attend those sort of meetings or even interact with those sort of people always,
Well, let's talk a bit about Mito World, which has tried to create some coherence around this. The public face of Mito World has been its web portal, but there has been ongoing work behind the scenes outside of public view. Can you talk about the scientific advisory board Mito World has put together and your role in that, and who you've been able to attract? What's the pitch to them?
Well, again, Gordon deserves a lot of the credit. I've had a lab for 25 years. I've been doing mitochondria for almost 35 years, virtually my whole adult life. Just by being around a long time, you get to know a lot of people, and so you develop a network of colleagues. Some of them are close friends, And when Gordon pitched me this idea, and he got a terrific person in the UK involved early on, Mike Murphy, who's really well respected, someone that I've long admired his work. And then we slowly started to think of people in different arenas. So for aging, Andy Dillon is really well known. For mitochondrial dynamics, Heidi McBride is known. Erica Pierce is well known for her work on immunology and metabolism, as well as mitochondria. I'm not listing, Jerry Shadle. We were talking about mitochondrial DNA. He's one of the pioneers of mitochondrial DNA inflammation. And I'm not listing all of the 8 or 10, all of the people here. And forgive me for all my friends off the top of my head. I can go on and on and on. And what's nice is it's also international. So Anu Solomanyan in Finland, who's a terrific physician scientist working in primary mitochondrial diseases, is one of the people involved. And Carlos Moraes, who's been the leader in gene therapy, is involved. So forgive me, I don't have it all in front of me, the 8 or 10 people and more on the advisory board, but these are all the top people with their particular expertise. And the idea is for them to sort of lead task forces in different areas and maybe come up with the key questions and then put it on a white paper. And then, if there's money, then try to figure out how best to distribute it, but also maybe try to make connections and say, well, maybe we should have somebody out in the universe who really knows about disease X and who's kind of interested in mitochondria and hook that person with some other people. And the other one is I'm still into organic. I don't like top-down approaches that much. I think, collaborators of 2 or 3 is better than 30. But the other one is sometimes a lone wolf has a great idea. Right? Some person, they have a great idea out of the box. And there should be mechanisms to fund those people if they're sound, and we should be open to those people. So it shouldn't be only mandated by some task forces. There should be some wiggle room. But again, what I'm excited is there's a lot of people who are interested in doing this, but it obviously needs resources, cash to get it
I
going.
actually find the task forces compelling. How do you see these taking shape and advancing the field? What do you see them doing?
Because and you can see it on the website, there's different areas, and we've talked about some of these areas, from neurodegeneration to aging to signaling to inflammation and to the shape dynamics of mitochondria, how they interact with other organelles, and it can go on and on. But to have those people, those leaders, lead a sort of a small meeting and have an open discussion with other people who are working in those particular areas and some outside of it, and really ask the tough questions, whether what are we missing here, and what do we need to address, and then writing it down. And so then you can have like if you're in a perfect world, if you had money, you can write a request for funding announcement where anyone could apply and say, we think here's a big question in the mitochondria field, and here's some key points to address. Oh, and here's the other thing. Maybe you have a better idea or a better question in that particular field, and we're open to that as well.
And how do you see them ultimately creating a more coherent landscape of basic mitochondrial science?
Well, I think once you put a North Star of what you want to do on paper, and as a collaboration among many people, and then there are funding mechanisms to get those people going, then you can have small meetings, open meetings, but it'll mesh through like a Zoom like connectivity monthly, couple of times a year, etc. And you can start a discussion on one umbrella, and you can also use open access mechanisms, Substack, etc., to post ideas, print papers, etc., as they're coming, and really try to just open the communication, and so it's not so siloed. So like I was saying, I'm not an ALS or a Parkinson's expert, but I'm interested in those. I'm working with people in my own area, in my own institution, and I'm trying to go to those meetings. And I'm sure there are other people in the mitochondria field who are doing work that are also kind of siloed like I am, but bring them in a mitochondria umbrella. Where right now I would only be, if I'm interested in Parkinson's, only in a Parkinson's umbrella, or if I'm interested in aging, only in an aging umbrella with other aging scientists. And those are good umbrellas to be in and good networks, but it'd be nice to be in a mitochondrial network, if that makes sense.
5, 10 years from now, where do you hope this field will be, and what role do you think your effort with MitoWall and its projects will do to contribute to this future?
I think we're all interested in the three big questions. Just to circle back, what do mitochondria do to control optimal function in any given cell? How does it not function optimally, which may be related to aging? What happens when it's not optimal, and does it contribute to any given disease? What are ways to therapeutically fix that? And then there's the primary mitochondrial diseases is in that field, right? And when I look at all four of them, people are actively working with them. And I think science will continue to go, and there'll be an organic continued discussion like it always is. But I just think things like this can be a catalyst, right? Just like you were saying with the genome sequencing, and became a catalyst once you had the whole genome. And then we started developing technologies to take advantage of that. Now we have CRISPR, we can edit it. It's been revolutionary. I think science will progress, whether organically it does it. It might take 20 years, let's say, maybe 40 years. If there's catalyst where there's an umbrella program and there's money and there's energy, maybe it happens quicker. I would like to think it would.
Navdeep Chandel, professor of medicine and biochemistry and molecular genetics at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine and a member of the MitoWorld Scientific Advisory Board. Nav, thanks as always.
Great. Thank you, Danny.